Hi there, and welcome to another round of What the F is going on? And, well, seen from Europe, things are, calming down a bit. Well, kinda, nowhere near normal. The EU is moving ahead and is doing its best to secure funding for military enlargement all over Europe because, well, the Americans are not to be trusted anymore. So we'll have to do things on our own. And unusually for Europe, for the EU, it's moving fairly fast and attempting to release large amounts of money from this. And it seems to be working. And they've even found a way to bypass Viktor Orban's Hungary, who would usually hold a veto, but they've just worked around him. At some point, though, they'll have to confront him, because at some point they'll have to get something through that requires, well, unanimity. And he does hold a veto, as does Fico in Slovakia. He seems to be more amenable to reason, though, and doesn't really dare confront the EU in the same way that Hungary does. Hungary, though, seems to forget that they are quite dependent on EU funds, and that's what they used to beat him into submission last time he tried to pull stunt, and they will very likely do the same. So things are moving ahead, and are usually fast, but still seemingly orderly, and seems to be some kind of, well, union would be the wrong word because, well, we have the European Union, but some kind of consensus coalescing about how to deal with Ukraine, still giving the UK, what I'm talking about, the US a chance to do what's right. And I think they're working from the old Churchill expression that the US is always going to do the right thing once they've tried everything else. And they're probably in the fuck around phase now, and at some point they'll find out, and then the assumption is, do the right thing. But just to be sure, stuff is happening, and this is going to cost the American weapons industries a lot of money, because all that money that's being released, well, that's probably going to be sent in Europe rather than the US, because again, they are not to be trusted. Yeah, where this ends up is kind of hard to say, but at least stuff is happening. And it seems in Ukraine as well, they've seemed to have stopped on a lot of fronts. They seem to have stopped the Russian advances, in some cases even beating them back. They've done some encircling and stuff with some Russian forces around Pokrovsk, and it seems not great, but okay. Which is good, because that buys Europe time to get its act together, or the US to get back to its senses. But yeah, and then we move on to the US. Oh yeah, I forgot, we're still waiting for the new German government. It's quite clear what's going to happen, but still they do take their sweet time getting the details of the arrangement in place. It's going to be the Social Democrats and the Christian Conservatives that form a government with, well, Friedrich Merz as Chancellor, which comes to no one's surprise. And they normally work either very fast, because almost everything's been arranged beforehand, or it will take a month or so, which is annoying. I thought they would be in place. I thought they would have things, well, hammered into place before the election, really, because everyone knew where this was going. But this might take up to a month or so before they actually come out with this new government. And now on to the Americas, because, oh boy, the Americas. Well, Trump has done what he said he would. He seems to think that when you have a trade surplus, well, when another country has a trade surplus with you, then they are taking advantage of you. And the US, well, a lot of countries have a trade surplus with the US because they buy a lot of stuff. They also sell a lot of stuff, and all in all, it balances out because, well, the US is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. So you can't really claim that there's a huge problem with the US being taken advantage of, except if you're Donald Trump. And he does. Also with very close allies and neighbors. And he just fired off tariffs on Canada Mexico, and China's not really surprised. There were already tariffs in place there, but he increased those. So right now the situation is that we have a 25%, the US has a 25% tariff on all goods from Canada and from Mexico, and I think it's a 20% tariff on everything from China. Yeah, that would be 3 out of the 4 largest trading partners the US has got. That doesn't seem too clever, especially when you consider what a tariff is. A tariff is an import duty. If an American company imports something from Canada now, they'll have to add a 25% import tax. And that tax is going to be passed on to consumers. So prices are going to increase quite a lot, because it's not just 25% on the base price. That's going to, well, percolate up through the system and cause some massive price increases at the consumer level. The idea is that if imported goods become too expensive, then consumers will stop buying them and local producers will get to pick up that slack, which should help production at home. Except there's a reason why all this production was moved abroad in the first place, because it was too damn expensive to do in the US. And that means that either way, prices are going to increase for American consumers. And it's not just that, because the assumption here is that, well, Trump's assumption at least seems to be that no one is going to be retaliating, because while the US does import a lot of stuff from, let's say, Canada, Canada also imports a lot of stuff from the US. And when you start blocking the Canadians' ability to make money in the US, well, Canada sure as hell is going to block the ability of American companies to make money in Canada. They are going to respond. And when they do that, you have a trade war. Trump, of course, like the bully he is, has said, "How dare you punish me for punishing you? I'm going to punish you even more." And he has threatened to increase tariffs even more. Hence the trade war thing, because this is going to escalate. And that's kind of stupid when the US in this situation, because they get a lot of stuff that they absolutely need from Canada. And right now it's just Canada. Canada sits on a large part of the American market for, well, lumber, for aluminium and steel, for energy, and for oil and gas. See, the majority of the gasoline used, or petrol, call it what you want, that's used in the US is not US produced. It's refined from from Canadian crude. The American crude is not really that easy to refine, and it's mostly exported, it seems. So American cars are running on Canadian gasoline. So Canada can just shut off the taps, and that will be it. And you can't just turn over the refineries to use American crude. Those have different composition. American crude and Canadian crude have different compositions, so you can't just switch over and use that. That's going to be, well, as far as I read, between 18 and 24 months to do that switchover. So if Canada shuts off the oil, well, prices of gasoline in the US are going to increase, and increase massively. And energy. Most of the countries, most of the states in the northern part of the US are very, very dependent on the energy they get from Canada, which is a huge exporter of energy, electrical energy. And they can just shut it off. That will basically black out New York, for instance. And the American internal grid is in a horrible condition. So you can't just transfer energy from elsewhere in the US. The grid just can't take it. And Trump seems to have forgotten these facts. The Canadians, they haven't. And then you get to Mexico. Well, the US imports a lot of foodstuffs from Mexico. So, of course, Mexico is just going to lie down and accept those tariffs, right? Yeah, not very likely. That's going to be very, very expensive for Americans who go grocery shopping. Just everyday stuff like, food. Yeah. And China. Well, it's not like anyone buys anything from China, really, is it? Yeah, that's going to be felt quite massively as well. And China has already responded. They've increased tariffs on US agricultural products massively and basically cut off any imports of soybeans, which is exactly what they did last time Trump tried the stunt with tariffs. And he had to provide massive subsidies for American farmers to avoid them just going bankrupt. Yeah, this is probably heading the same direction. And seeing that Trump is what he is, he thinks that the US has been taken advantage of by the entire world. So he's now more or less threatened every country in the world with tariffs, including the EU. Yeah, and that's going to be a bit of an issue because the EU is very, very adept at this tariffs game. They know exactly what they're doing. And if you try to hit one EU country, well, that's a bit like attacking one NATO country. Well, how that was supposed to use. If you attack one, you attack them all and they all respond. The exact same thing is going to happen with tariffs in this case. So that would be 4 out of the 4 largest markets for the US, the 4 largest trading partners, which Trump is going to attack right out of the box. Not to mention the entire mess he's causing on the home front with his deportations and all that. Apparently there's a lot of stuff in California and stuff that isn't being picked. The oranges were just rotting on the trees because people didn't dare show up for work because they might be grabbed and deported. So more expensive groceries from Mexico, more expensive, well, lumber and energy and all that from Canada, more expensive high-tech stuff and high-grade things from Europe, like, I don't know, cars, German cars, stuff like that, French wine, all that's going to increase massively, and they're going to retaliate. So everything that the US exports to Europe, well, that's probably going to stop fairly quickly as well. Yeah, this is going to be fairly interesting. But I doubt that Trump gets the message yet. He's going to have to feel it in the hard way, and that's going to be interesting. But the Dow Jones hasn't gotten the message. That means the American stock market, it's been taking a nosedive, and it's probably not going to pick up anytime soon as long as Trump keeps doing what he's doing. So, interesting times ahead. I'll pick up the camera as usual when I see something interesting going on. Well, I'll see you then.